The human mind isn't as rational as it seems. In fact, we're constantly being tricked by psychological tricks. Have you ever noticed how some people seem effortlessly charismatic, or how certain situations make us act without realizing it? It's not a coincidence, it's a strategy. Small details like eye contact, posture, and even breathing profoundly influence how others see us. And the best part? You can use these secrets to your advantage. Imagine extracting information without asking directly, being more trustworthy, or avoiding manipulation with simple adjustments to your communication. Sound helpful? Then get ready, because once you learn these techniques, you'll never view interactions the same way again. Have you ever noticed how some people have a magnetic, almost irresistible presence? Often, it has less to do with appearance and more to do with a simple psychological trick: strategic eye contact. Holding your gaze for just a second longer than expected can create an instant connection, making any conversation more engaging. This small detail conveys trust and genuine interest, making the other person feel like they really matter. In social or professional encounters, try looking someone directly in the eye when greeting them and holding your gaze a little longer than usual. But don't overdo it, or you'll come across as intimidating. In psychology's behind-the-scenes study, prolonged eye contact activates areas of the brain associated with connection and charisma. It's no wonder that great leaders, influencers, and even skilled salespeople have mastered this technique. Imagine a speaker who captures your attention simply because they seem to be talking directly to you. Now consider the opposite. Someone who constantly looks away conveys a sense of disinterest or insecurity. If you want to be remembered and make an impact, use this psychological trick when telling a story, giving an opinion, or even closing a deal. Of course, everything needs balance. The secret is to adjust the intensity of your gaze according to the situation. If you are talking to someone who is shy, soften your eye contact so as not to seem intrusive. When flirting, a slightly longer look can be the key to sparking interest. In meetings, focusing on the other person's eyes conveys credibility and can even influence decisions. This small adjustment in the way you interact can open doors that previously seemed closed. And speaking of open doors, motivation and rewards can be decisive factors in human behavior. The search for motivation is a more complex mental game than it seems. Interestingly, when someone expects a reward for a challenging task, the intrinsic pleasure of that activity can disappear. This happens because the brain starts to focus more on the prize than on the journey, reducing the satisfaction of the process. Have you ever noticed how, when something becomes an obligation, it loses its fun? Imagine someone who loves to draw, but when they start selling their art under pressure, they lose enthusiasm. This psychological trick can be used to your advantage. Instead of promising a reward to keep them motivated, find ways to make the activity enjoyable in itself. This happens because our brain has two motivation systems: the internal and the external. The internal one feeds on challenge, curiosity, and the pleasure of overcoming obstacles. The external one depends on incentives such as money, praise, or recognition. A classic experiment showed that children who loved to draw lost interest when they started receiving rewards for what they used to do for fun. This teaches a valuable lesson. If you want to stay focused and productive in the long run, make your activities challenging and interesting, without relying solely on external rewards. The best strategy is to find a balance between internal and external motivation. If you have a boring task to complete, make it more engaging by adding personal challenges, like setting a record time to complete it. Instead of saying, "If I do this, I'll get that," ask yourself, "How can I make this process more exciting in and of itself?" This simple tweak can completely change the way you approach challenges. And speaking of challenges, knowing how to spot manipulation attempts can be a key skill in avoiding psychological traps. Manipulation is a subtle game, and often happens without the victim realizing it. One of the psychological tricks most used by manipulators is to exaggerate their insistence that someone accept something, be it a favor, a gift, or even an opinion. It seems like generosity, but in reality it is a trap to create a feeling of indebtedness. The person receiving something feels obligated to reciprocate, and that is exactly where manipulation takes place. When someone tries to force something too much, the best strategy is to firmly refuse, without long explanations. The more you justify, the more room you give the other person to counter-argue. Manipulation hides in the details, and human behavior is predictable enough that certain patterns repeat themselves. Have you ever noticed how pushy salespeople often say, "It's just a test, you don't have to decide now"? This makes the brain relax and accept, without realizing that the decision is already being influenced. Another classic trick is when someone says that they are doing something exclusively for you, creating a false sense of privilege. If you want to avoid falling into this trap, train yourself to pay attention not only to what people say, but also to how they say it. If the offer seems too good to be true, there's probably a hidden price. The key to avoiding these traps is simple: refuse without giving too many reasons. A crisp, direct, "No, thank you," shuts down any attempt at manipulation without leaving room for insistence. If the person keeps pressing, that's already a warning that something is wrong. This kind of awareness not only protects you from being manipulated, but also strengthens your posture and confidence. And speaking of control, knowing how to control your own breathing can be a powerful tool for influencing the emotional state of others. Breathing is an underrated tool when it comes to influencing the emotional state of those around you. One of the most effective psychological tricks is to consciously control your own breathing when interacting with someone who is panicking or nervous. This is because humans tend to unconsciously synchronize their breathing rhythm with that of the people around them. If you breathe slowly and deeply next to someone who is anxious, the person tends to gradually start to imitate your pattern and calm down without even realizing it. This is a technique used by therapists, first responders, and even good leaders in times of crisis. This synchronization occurs because the human nervous system is highly influenced by subtle signals from the environment. Have you ever noticed how, in a room full of agitated people, it is more difficult to remain calm? This is because we involuntarily pick up on the emotional state of the group. Similarly, if you are next to someone breathing in a controlled, deep, and rhythmic way, the opposite effect occurs. The person feels safer and more relaxed. It's a simple but powerful trick that can be used in everyday situations, such as calming a friend before an important presentation or a coworker under pressure. Applying this knowledge can transform your presence into something naturally calming. Next time you're in front of someone who's distressed, instead of saying, "Calm down," which usually does nothing, simply adjust your breathing. Inhale deeply through your nose, hold it for a few seconds, and exhale slowly. Little by little, you'll see the other person unconsciously follow suit. This demonstrates quiet leadership and emotional control, qualities that make anyone seem more trustworthy. And speaking of trust, there's a subtle but extremely effective technique for avoiding being fooled by lies. Trust is one of the most important pillars in any type of relationship, whether personal or professional. And one of the most effective psychological tricks to appear and be more trustworthy is simple. Keep your gaze fixed between the eyes of the person you are talking to. This small detail makes the other person feel like they are being closely observed, making it difficult for them to lie or try to deceive you. In negotiation situations, job interviews, or even casual conversations, this technique creates an environment of transparency and seriousness without having to say a single word. This happens because the human brain associates direct eye contact with honesty and confidence. If someone repeatedly looks away while speaking, it generates an instinctive feeling of distrust, even without concrete evidence. This is why police officers and investigators train to read the gaze of suspects during interrogations. But this technique can also be used to your advantage in everyday life. When talking to someone, keep your gaze slightly fixed between the person's eyes, instead of constantly looking away. This simple adjustment improves your presence and makes others take you more seriously. Applying this technique naturally is essential to avoid appearing forced. If you feel uncomfortable holding your gaze, practice it little by little, starting with simpler interactions, such as with waiters or coworkers. And if you come across someone who tries to avoid your gaze all the time, this could be a sign that something is being hidden. Trust is built with small details like this, and mastering this skill can open doors in negotiations and social interactions. And speaking of effective strategies, there is a curious method for obtaining information quickly without having to ask directly. Humans have an almost uncontrollable urge to correct others when they see something wrong. This is one of the most useful psychological tricks for getting information out quickly. Instead of asking directly, try posting a false statement about the topic and see how people rush to correct it. In online forums, discussion groups, or even in face-to-face conversations, this method can yield detailed responses that you would have trouble getting just by asking. That's because when you see a mistake, your brain feels an almost automatic urge to correct it, and in the process, you provide valuable information. This technique works because it activates a psychological phenomenon called the overcorrection effect. When someone sees misinformation being spread, they feel the need to correct it to protect the truth or what they believe to be true. So if you want to know the details about a complex topic, try posting something slightly wrong and wait. A classic example is someone on a tech forum saying, "iPhones never had a notch, did they?" And within minutes, experts are popping up detailing every model and year that did. The desire to teach leads people to reveal information that they would not readily share if asked directly. Of course, this strategy should be used wisely and in moderation. In professional or academic conversations, it can be more effective to introduce a false hypothesis in a subtle way, such as, "If I understand correctly, investing in stocks always generates guaranteed profits, right?" The answer will come with arguments and explanations that would be difficult to provide if you simply ask, "Is investing in stocks safe?" This method can be an excellent tool for gaining insights without seeming pushy. And since we are talking about strategic communication, even the way you hold your drink can influence how others perceive you. Communication goes far beyond words, and small gestures can completely change how people perceive you. One of the most intriguing psychological tricks involves simply the way you hold your drink at social gatherings. Holding your glass or cup at chest height creates a subtle barrier between you and others, making you seem closed off and less approachable. On the other hand, holding your drink at waist height or at your side makes your posture seem more open, encouraging more natural interactions. This small detail can make all the difference when meeting new people or creating spontaneous connections. This is because the human brain interprets physical barriers as signs of defense. Someone who crosses their arms or keeps objects between themselves and others gives an unconscious impression of distance. Have you ever noticed that extroverted people tend to gesture more and keep their bodies free from barriers? They create an environment of closeness without having to say a single word. Applying this technique can be useful in a variety of situations, from a job interview to a casual encounter. The more open your body language, the more receptive people tend to be to you. If you want to boost your presence even further, combine this strategy with strategic eye contact and a firm tone of voice. Small adjustments in posture can increase your influence and make you more memorable. Try this technique the next time you're at an event. Hold your drink in a relaxed manner, keep your arms free, and notice how the interactions flow more easily. When we understand how subtle gestures affect communication, we can shape our image naturally and effectively. And now that you know these secrets, maybe it's time to delve even deeper into the fascinating world of psychological tricks. Now that you know these psychological tricks, the question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to continue acting on autopilot, or are you going to start using these techniques to transform your interactions? The truth is that small adjustments in the way you communicate can completely change the way people perceive you, and, consequently, the opportunities that arise in your life. So, start testing. Try strategic eye contact, adjust your posture, control your breathing when dealing with someone who is anxious. See how the responses change, how your presence becomes more impactful. Knowledge is only valuable when put into practice. And believe me, once you start applying these tricks, it is impossible not to notice the difference. Now tell me, which of these techniques will you try first? Leave your comment and share your experience. And if you want to continue learning more about how to master the art of communication and persuasion, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We still have a lot to explore together.